Morning, class 10. Today we are going to learn unit 3 in our textbook. So please turn your page number 23. In unit 3, at first there is reading. In reading, there is engage yourself. So in engage yourself, you can see there a fable is a short story typically with animals as characters conveying a moral. Now answer the following questions. Some questions are there for you. Have you ever heard about the ant and the grasshopper? If yes, tell it to your friend and in the class. Have you ever seen or heard about people like the ant and the grasshopper? If yes, share it with your friends in the class. So please see this video and share your idea to the friends. Okay, and at first there is we are going to learn the text, the ant and the grasshopper. I could not help thinking of this fable when the other when the other day I saw George Ramsay lunching by himself in a restaurant. I never saw anyone where an expression of such deep gloom. He was staring into space. He looked up as though the burden of the whole world sat on his shoulders. I was sorry for him. I suspected at once that his unfortunate brother had been causing trouble again. I went up to him and held out my hand. So there was a difficult problem, and Mr. George Ramsay was staring up to. He was staring. He was in thinking himself in a restaurant, and the writer found him in very deep gloom, or he was very sad, and he looked as if the Ramsay looked as if he was carrying the whole load of the world. He was in the great tension, and the writer was very sorry to see him so. And perhaps the writer guessed it was because of his brother. Perhaps his brother is causing him trouble again and again. And he went up to the means writer went up to the Mr. George Ramsay and asked something. How are you? I asked. Miss Writer asked, and I'm not in hilarious spirit. Means I'm not in the humorous mood. He answered. And is it Tom again? He said. And yes, it's Tom again. He says. And why don't you chuck him? You have done everything in the world for him. You must know uh, by now that he's quite hopeless. I suppose every family has a black sheep, and Tom had been a sole trial to him for 20 years. He had begun his life decently enough. He went to the business, married, and had two children. The Ramsay were perfectly respectable people, and there was every reason to suspect that Tom Ramsay would have a useful and honorable career. This way. And now again the text continue. But one day, without warning, he announced that he did not like to walk and that he was not suited for marriage. He wanted to enjoy himself. He would listen to no exploitations. He left his wife, his office. He had a little money, and he spent 2 happy years in a various capitals of Europe. Remorse of his doing reached his relations from time to time. and they were profoundly shocked. He certainly had a very good time. They shook their heads and asked what would happen when his money was spent. They soon found out he borrowed. He was charming and unscrupulous. I have never met anyone to whom it was more difficult to refuse a loan. He made a steady income from his friends and he made friends easily. But he always said that the money you spend on necessities was boring. The money that was amusing to expend was the money you spent on luxuries. For this, he depended on his brother George. He did not waste his charms on him. George was a serious man and insensible to such excitement. George was respectable. Once or twice he fell to Tom's promise of amendments and gave him considerable sum in order that he might make a fresh start. On this, Tom bought a motor car and some very nice jewelry, but when circumstances forced us to realize that his brother would never settle down, he washed his hands of him without a qualm. He began to blackmail him. It was not very nice for a respectable lawyer to find out his brother shaking cocktails behind behind the bar of his favorite restaurant to see him waiting on a box seat of a taxi outside his club. Tom said that Tom said that to shop in a bar or to drive a taxi was perfectly decent occupation, but if George could oblige him with a couple of £100, he did not mind of one of his family giving it up. George paid. Once Tom nearly went to prison. George was terribly upset. He went into the whole discreditable affair. Really, Tom had gone too far. He had been wild, thoughtless, and selfish, but he had never before done anything dishonest, by which George meant illegal, and if he were prosecuted, he would assuredly be convicted. But you can't allow your only brother to go jail. The man Tom had cheated, a man called Cronso, was vindictive. He was determined to take the matter into court. He said Tom was a scoundrel and should be punished. It cost George an indefinite deal of trouble and £500 to settle the affair. I have never seen him in such a rage as when he heard that Tom and Cronso had gone off together to Monte Carlo the moment and they cashed the check and they spent the happy month there. Now we are going to do the question answer. We have in the question answer exercise. At first, in page number 25, you can see question number A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. In question number, let us see question number A. Who was a black sheep in Ramses' family and why? And the answer is Tom was a black sheep as he left everything for enjoyment and even cheated his family times and again. And question number B. What was a respectable profession to Tom? And answer is perhaps no profession was respectable to him. And you have now question number C. Why was George Ramsay staring into the space? And answer is He was staring to the space as his brother cheated him many times. Now we have the question number D. We are continuing the question. Why did Tom leave his work and wife? And answer is he left the work and wife for enjoyment of the world. Similarly, Tom did how did Tom manage his life when he ran out of money at first? And he borrowed money from friends when he ran out of the money at first, right? Similarly, next question, how did Cronshaw and Tom cheat judge? By making a false case, they cheated judge. And next question, what forced judge to realize that his brother would never settle down? Even making false case to himself and cheating his brother forced him to realize his brother would never settle down. Okay, now we have another exercise. That exercise is in page number 26 and it is the exercise to order. Some sentences are given here. He began to blackmail his brother for money. He left his wife and his office. When his money was spent, he borrowed it from friends and spent it on luxuries. George continued to pay for his brother's expense. He brought a motor car and some very nice jewelry. Tom took help of Cronshaw to cheat his brother and left for the Monte Carlo. He promised to make a fresh start. Ramsay were perfectly respectable people. He never settled down. So these were the uh, given sentences, different sentences. So as you have just studied the text and the story, which event comes first, that you have to order one. Similarly, which comes second, you have to order two. Which comes third, you have to order three. Which comes to fourth, you have to order four. Let us see there. So at first, the Ramsay were perfectly respectable people, and he left his wife and office, and he bought a motor car and some nice jewelry. And when his money was spent, he borrowed it from friends and he spent it on luxuries. Similarly, this he took help of Cronshaw to cheat his brother. He began to blackmail for his money. Like that, we have to order it. Okay. Let us go to another exercise there. Using the summarize the story in a paragraph is there. So now we are going to summarize the story. Ramsay were perfectly respectable people, and there was every person to suppose that Tom Ramsay would have a useful and honorable career, but when circumstances force George to realize that his brother would never settle down, and he washed his hands of him. Tom, without a qualm, began to blackmail him. Tom said that to serve in a bar or to drive a taxi was perfectly decent occupation, but if George could oblige him with a couple of £100, he didn't mind for the honor of the family giving it up. George paid. Tom nearly went to prison. Tom and Conso had gone up together to Monte Carlo, and the The moment they cash the check after cheating with a false case. Now we have grammar exercise. Change the following into indirect speech. That is in your page number 27. So at first there is Anupam says, where do you live? All the sentences here in the indirect speech are in question form. So I have made a video how to make indirect speech, and you can also see in that video as well. So here we are going to solve. Anupam asks me, so why we are using here me, as we need object here to for writing. So second person is here you, so you must be changed according to the object. So we need to put here object, and why we put here where this is wh words, so we use the same wh words here. So where, and you change according second person change according to object. So me, here is me, so me becomes I in place of subject, where I, and live, that live, do live, that is simple present, and it changed into simple past. And let us see question number B. Sanjeev says, can you solve the problem? Can you say, Sanjeev says, can you solve the problem? This is also question. Let us see. Sanjeev asks, that much is given in our books, and me we have put here, as I told you in the question number 1. Here is you, second person, so we need an object, and if we have joined it with if because it is yes no question. For WH question we use the same WH words, but here is yes no question, so we use if or whether. If and you becomes I is in the same in the question number 1, and solve can becomes could, right? If I could solve the problem. Okay, now question number C. Praveen said, does Pramila love me? And how to solve it? Praveen asks me, right? Praveen asked me if, and Pramila, there's no question. So if Pramila, love becomes loved, me, second person, change according to, so, sorry, first person, me is first person, change according to subject. So Praveen, so here is him. And similarly, Dinesh said to his friends who went to Muktinath for worshipping the god, So see here, Dinesh asks his friends, and who, WH question, so same WH has been used here. Went, verb 2, so it has been changed into at plus verb 3, and Muktinath for worshipping the god, same. Okay, now continue. Another question. Navaraj said to Saraswati, will you visit me in Australia? Will you visit me in Australia? So it is yes no question, remember. So Navaraj told Saraswati, that much is given in our book. So it is better to use here ask instead of told, but the book has given told. And if and she, why you has been changed into she? You is second person, change according to object. So in object there is Saraswati, so the pronoun of Saraswati is she. And will has changed into would and visit, and me change into him. Why? Because Navaraj. That me is first person, change according to subject. Subject is Navaraj, so it has changed into him. In Australia, has been in Australia. Similarly, number F. Julia said to Poojan, how is your husband? So this is WH question. See here. So Julia inquired Poojan, that much has given in our book. And how is how here the same WH word, and is has changed into you. How is your husband, and it becomes how her husband was. How her husband was, because how was her husband, again ask question, so question cannot be met. So how her husband was, it is met. Okay, now similarly, number G, a stranger said to Asta, what kind of music do you like? And stranger asks Asta, what kind, that is the WH words, of music, and she liked. You is the second person, change into object, object is Asta, so it has been changed into she, and like this is present becomes past. Similarly, Bharat Lal said to Firoz, aren't you applying for a grant? And Bharat Lal asked Firoz, yes no question. So he, if I, why I, you is the if he was if he was not applying for a grant. Similarly, Ainamar, Eritos said to Durgalal, aren't you in the office? Eritos asked Durgalal if he was not in the office. So similarly, didn't you pay her? She said, I asked if I had not paid her.